So, hello, I am Linda Heitzman Powell, and I serve as chair of the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being held remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Denise Seisman.
Present.
Allison Bell.
Here.
Alec Bernstein.
Present.
As David mentioned, Wes Dotson is absent. Kelly Harrison.
Here.
Emily Kessler.
I'm here. I'm eating lunch. My camera's going to be off until I'm done, but then I'll turn it back on.
Okay, thanks. Pamela Neidert.
Here.
Christy Marie Steele.
Present.
Stephanie Wiley.
Here.
Mike Williams. Mike.
And I don't see Mike on the call yet.
Okay. And Alice Zhang is absent. So I would like to note the following BSRB staff members are also present. David Fye, our executive director, and I don't see anyone else.
It should just be me today. If we need Leslie to log on later, we can ask her to log on.
Okay, perfect. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Linda. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the advisory committee to accept public comment from individuals under the Kansas Open Meetings Act, though the act does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at the meeting as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and also the broadcast of the YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the COMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the COMA. On May 12th, 2025, we sent notice of this meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meeting. The notice is also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You are also able to request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to our clerical staff at bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And we did check the conference call line before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone beep over and introduce themselves, I will let you know. And also during the introductory information, Mike Williams logged in as well, so he is in attendance as well.
I was just going to say that. You beat me to the punchline. So this meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda, which is approval of the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda.
Thank you, Denise. Who seconded? Sorry, Alec.
I can second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Our agenda is approved. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the previous minutes.
Linda, I'm also going to be off camera. I'm on camera because I'm also eating and no one wants to watch. So,
Okay.
FYI.
So are you saying you don't chew with your mouth closed?
I mean, I do, but it's angles and it's a hamburger, so it's not fun for anybody. So it'll be fun. I can motion to approve our agenda though.
Okay. All right, well, we're on to the meeting notes from last time.
That's what I meant. So
Okay. So Allison makes a motion to approve the minutes from the advisory committee meeting on April 11th, 2025. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
I think I heard Nikki second it first. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. I'll try to remember those are in this packet for the next large board meeting, David, so I don't bug you for those. The next item on the agenda, I think I just closed the agenda. Sorry.
Okay, the next item is the executive director's report, so I can start
Okay,
if you'd like me to.
there you go.
Okay, well, thank you, Linda. I appreciate it. I only provide some operations updates for the advisory committee, as well as any items of note from the most recent board meeting, so we can jump into those.
I don't know what it is.
So the first item, as far as operations, I am meeting with some representatives of CE Broker next week, and we are coming up on about 5 to 6 months since all 7 professions had available access to the CE Broker resources. The board reached an agreement with that company last fall. We spent a lot of time working with staff of CE Broker to make sure that they understood the specific continuing education requirements for each of the 7 professions, and they could build a portal and create essentially accounts for everyone under the BSRB with a permanent license. But to make sure that we were able to effectively implement those, we did those in 3 phases, and the last phase went live in January of 2025. So now that it's been between 5 to 6 months, we're wanting to collect some feedback. I realize our licensure cycle is 2 years, and some people may wait to sign up for an account until they come up for their renewal of their license. And of course, as we've talked about a few times, this is an optional service, so no one is required to use the CE Broker resources, although we do recommend that people take advantage of that. This was something that the board worked on, and this company was able to offer it as a free resource to the licensing board, and also a free account for all licensees as a tool for them to upload documentation of their continuing education hours, and specifically to target what the hours were obtained in. So for example, the required hours of ethics, when you upload your documents, you can basically mark which ones would fall into that category, with the idea being that when you renew your license, we audit 10% of all our licensees for compliance with the education requirements. And when we do the renewals and we do the auditing process, if someone is using a CE Broker account and they have uploaded their documentation, rather than the traditional model of sending materials back and forth, we can log into the portal, review the documents, and then approve the person through the audit process much more quickly. So we realize that it will take a little bit of time for everybody to get on board, but since we do have a meeting coming up, we want to get good information from them as far as how many people have signed up already, if they're hearing of any issues as people are signing up through the process, that we can help with providing more information on our end. And also, if there's anything that you would like me to deliver to them in terms of feedback, that perhaps will be things they can work on. I'd like to collect that from you as well. We've been talking with each of the advisory committees and giving a few minutes for some feedback, so I'll take some notes today. I did want to let you know there's a couple items that the committees have already talked to me about. One, when we first set up this agreement with CE Broker and we provided some introductory information to our licensees on how to use their resources, there was a little confusion. When you go to their website, the link that we had used is a portal that is being used for other professions outside the BSRB. So some people use that portal and just put in their specific number, like 1, 2, 3, 4. If you do that and you don't include the acronym for what type of license it is, it will go to, I think, a veterinary board website. And so people were very confused about that. We tried to add some additional instructions in terms of future notices that you do have to use a similar format like you would use on the license verification side of the agency's website. But if you type in that Unless you were just recently licensed, it should recognize you. And so we're trying to make sure they get good information on new licensees so that they have an accurate list of all of our current licensees. But that is something we were able to provide some additional information. Some other comments from some of the advisory committees is that where can we find this information again? Because it was sent out several months ago. On our website, we do have the most recent news. And then once it's been a few months since that news was published, it is still available on our website, but it becomes archive news. So you need to go to our website, click on the more news, and then you need to click on archive news. And so the original announcement is still published. But based on the feedback we received from other advisory committees, what we're going to do is go to the professions pages, and we're going to add a link there so that individuals have a really easy way to access the CE broker account from their professions page as well. We are going to continue to promote the CE broker agreement because we think it's beneficial, but also reminding people that it is optional, so nobody has to do it. When we originally created this process, there was one more resource we were hoping to achieve, and because of some complications with us being in the process of moving licensing systems, we haven't been able to fully implement this yet. But our end result, we want this to be a situation to where when your license is up for renewal, and you want to renew electronically, you can go through the electronic renewal process. And when it asks you about continuing education, we would like there to be a live link in our renewal portal to the CE broker website. So that if you are using CE broker, you can click that and CE broker will take a look. And based on what you've uploaded or not, they will give you their thought in terms of whether you meet the requirements in terms of all of your hours being completed and the documentation being in place. Now, it's not going to stop you. It's just going to let you know based on what you've chosen to upload and whether you're using CE broker. They're trying to help you out with a verification step, but they will allow you to move forward even if you're not using CE broker. But that live link, that API, is something that we had in mind when we originally designed this. We have not been able to set that up, but eventually we do hope to have that as a resource too. So when you're going through the process, as you've been uploading hours over the course of the 2 years, when you go to renew your license and you do the attestation that says, at the time I'm renewing my license, I attest that I have already completed all of my hours. You can click the CE broker button, get a live confirmation that your hours are already there, and then you can move forward with more peace of mind. And so that is the goal. We're not there yet, but that is something in the future we hope to achieve. So like I said, I will pause now. And if you have any feedback on personally using CE broker, or if you have comments from other colleagues that have used CE broker, now that it's been a few months, feel free to let me know those comments now. So I'll pause, and if you do have some comments, go ahead and unmute yourself and let me know what your experience has been or what you've heard from others.
Do we have an idea of how many people have actually used it yet? Or
That-
like analysts or not?
We don't. That is part of the information we hope to get next week. So I can provide that to you hopefully at the August meeting. But currently we don't get reports in terms of how many people have signed up for it.
I'd be interested to know how many of you would be interested in that, given the fact that we also have to upload the documentation to, or at least the information to the BACB when we renew.
So there's those of us that are not certified on the same cycle. So thankfully nowadays, most people that get their VCBA and get their LBA and they're on the same like 2-year cycle. But then there's people like me who are certified in the off year. So I have to certify literally every year. And so I have to actually keep 2 separate spreadsheets of like, this one counts for this one, but this one counts for this one. So hopefully I can maybe get rid of my spreadsheets if I can just upload both of them into like one and then to the other. Does that make sense? Like at the time that I do it, it's going to go towards whichever.
Well, that's interesting to me, Allison, because just looking at how having a repository instead of maybe on my hard drive where I have the documents and the documentation, I have not used CE broker over the last couple of meetings. I was thinking I might, maybe log in at some point and see if I could upload some of the stuff, because when I went to go through, I had to, look at the name of it, had to open up the actual PDF of the certificate itself, and, is there an automated function on this, David, well, I bet there's not, that would scan the PDF and pull out the name of the instructor and how much was allocated for it? Because I know some of the CEs that we get, like APBA, they automatically upload them to the site. Or
Future
like
uses-
ABAI, yeah, they'll
Future
automatically.
uses of AI, Linda. Future uses of AI, hopefully.
Yep, well, that's like on the agenda to talk about today. So, since, we're a unique group in that we serve two masters, so to speak. We have our regulatory agency, the BSRB, and then we have our other regulatory agency, which is the BACB. And I don't think any of the other professions have to do it twice, do they, David?
Not that I'm familiar with. I know that there is some confusion sometimes with the other professions where you have some of the associations that says these are pre-approved by this association.
Mhm.
That does not mean that it's pre-approved by the BSRB. And so while it is likely to count, we have the regulations that specify what items count for ours. But there are some people who say, oh, this was pre-approved by a AS or CSW or Association of Social Workers, or let's say one of the other associations for the other professions. And some of their associations do offer pre-approval for continuing education. And some states have something maybe built into their regulations that say if it's pre-approved by this association, it meets our standards as well. We actually have separate standards, and so there's some confusion about that. But not exactly like you have what you were talking about for both groups that have review of how many hours you have for certain time periods.
So I would be, how many on here other than Allison would be interested in using CE Broker? Does it sound like anything as a VCBA that anybody would be interested in using as a repository for your CEs?
I would be interested in using it because kind of, Linda, like you said, I'll go into the BCBA website and it's like, okay, which ones have I loaded up and can I go back and see it? And, so that would be interesting. I did have a question, and David, I apologize if I missed this when you were talking. I just renewed my license last month. And when I renewed, like I had kind of forgotten about this. Is there any way, and maybe I missed it in the application, is there any way to add something like this? Like, are you interested in CE Broker? Click here or something just to give more information or a reminder that it's available? Because I probably would have signed up had I had that reminder.
Are you talking about the like the messages that we send out that says your license is set to expire in so much time, or?
Either that or even in the website, like when I had to go in and put in my CEUs and my information to renew, like if there was something there that said, hey, would you be interested in the use of CE Broker? I probably would have clicked on it and signed up right then and there. But again, I may have missed it, or maybe it's just not there. That might be a way to get people at least looking at it.
Okay, that's good feedback. I'm not sure. I don't think it's listed in those steps. So that's a good idea. I will take a look and have somebody take a look and make sure. And if it's not there, maybe we can add something that reminds people that it is a resource for them.
Especially since once you renew, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to have to start documenting again. It would be great to start right then as soon as you renew.
Mm-hmm.
So the only time that you guys are going to mandate the use of CE Broker is if they're like getting audited. That's where we're going to upload like the CEU certificates, or did I misunderstand that?
So officially, we're not mandating that it's used by anybody. I think when someone's audited, they have a choice. I would encourage them to use CE Broker. Some states do make it a requirement where they say our official auditing system is going to be through CE Broker. So if someone is audited, they have to use it. For us, they could put everything into CE Broker at that point if they're audited, or they could just send it to us the traditional way. for our staff to review. So we thought there might be reasons why people may just not want to use the eBroker and beyond what we were familiar with. And so we decided that if the people wanted to use the traditional method, they could continue to do that, kind of like the people that continue to renew by paper instead of the electronic process. We get over 90% of our applicants and licensees that renew electronically now, but there are some people that are very much, they want to use the paper process. And so we continue to allow that. This is kind of modeled after that.
I might have missed this too, but do neighboring states use it also, like Missouri or Oklahoma or Nebraska?
There are several states that use it, and I don't know that I can recall all the states. I think the first state that used it was Florida. I know that we have been looking at CE Broker for several years, but originally when we were starting to look at this was about 6 years ago, and no agencies in Kansas had been using it. And so while we thought we were interested and we thought it had some value, it's always dangerous when you're the first. And so we continue to keep it on our radar. But then recently, the Board of Nursing and the Board of Healing Arts went ahead and reached agreements and started partnering with them. And we have a lot of similarities with those two groups. And so when they reached agreements, we decided to renew our conversation with them. And so that's when we got on board. But in terms of other ones, I don't know. And I also know, when we started talking about an agreement with them, there's some information online and there's some critiques and criticisms of certain things. We wanted to review those things and make sure we could avoid any kind of issues. There are some states that audit 100% of all their licensees. And so when somebody renews, they are for sure going to be audited. And some of those states also made the eBroker the mandatory process they use for all of their auditing. And they've said it's been working out pretty well because it has shortened the time that the audits take. And so, so that works with us. We only audit 10% of all of our licensees. And so there may be people that go through their career and for whatever reason, they never get audited. But for those that do, I think it's a valuable resource. And also just, we've had some situations come up where someone was audited. And unfortunately, the only place they kept their records for their hours was in their school email or potentially their previous employer email, and they're no longer with that job. And so we asked them for the documentation and they say, oh, well, I no longer have access to that, and so I can't provide it, and that creates problems. Or potentially people keep one paper copy of it, and then there's a flood or a fire, and then they can't access the information unless they can get another copy from whoever provided it the first time around. And so, so I think there are some benefits to this, and that you get some peace of mind in terms of the hours are documented in a spot that is off-site and it's not going to be in danger of things like flood and fire. But for us, some of the things that made us unique and that we audit 10% versus 100%, there were some differences. But if you want, I can go back and take a look and see the states that they're working in. I know there's a lot of different professions. Like I said, one state had that veterinary board like I talked about. So for some states, there's probably lots of professions. And also sometimes states group professions differently. So they may be grouping a lot of regulatory boards all together. And so maybe that entire entity came under the CE Broker banner. But I'll bring back a little bit of information so you can kind of see how CE Broker is set up in other states.
Yeah, because it would be helpful for those that are licensed in multiple states. I imagine the neighboring states would be the ones that folks are duly licensed in. But if you're licensed in Missouri and Kansas, if you can use CE Broker and it speaks to both governing agencies, that could be more of a reason to use it.
Yeah, and I don't know, you may have to upload your documents separately for the two different licenses. So there may not be, and that may be outside of our control. We had a little bit of questions from some people who've held multiple licenses with the agency that have said, I think these hours would count for both this license and that license. Can I just upload them once and then click a button to apply them to the other license? And unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. So I think you do have to manually upload them for each license you have. But yeah, I'll do a little research and I'll bring something back in terms of what other states are using CE Broker. Well, thank you for the feedback on that. If you do have any other feedback prior to the meeting, I think it's on Wednesday next week, feel free to just shoot me an email. And then I'll go ahead and see if I can collect some information, and I'll let you know what sort of numbers we're seeing so far for people who've already signed up for CE Broker. And then we'll take a few extra steps after that meeting to probably provide the CE Broker links in a few more locations, like maybe into our system during the renewal process where people get a reminder there. And then maybe those letters we're sending out, and then maybe on the professions pages as well.
I know we really want to move on from this topic, but I have one more question. Sorry. Is that going to impact the number of audits that you guys do if people are going to start using CE Broker or CE Broker? Like, will you guys increase the number of audits that we're doing on?
No.
I don't think there's any conversation or plan for that. I think the 10% has been kind of the number that we have been using for a while, and I haven't heard any kind of interest in increasing that number.
Cool.
And, I had mentioned to you the other day, David, about putting it on the page of each of the different disciplines that we represent. But I really I think it was Emily that also said having that link on the actual tab where you renew, I think would be beneficial as well, especially when people are in the throes of trying to make sure that they have everything that they need. And just saying that it would be nice, coming back to, I think it was what Alec asked maybe about multiple entities, if there was in the future a way to be able to sync or coordinate across multiple license types and across multiple entities. Yeah, so that would be nice, but that means it would be making our lives easier. So
yeah.
Anyway, all right. Thank you all.
Well, I will report back on CE Broker, but thank you for the feedback and the comments. In my role, there are certain things that I do on a daily basis, but there are other things that licensees deal with, and a lot of this building the CE Broker model and figuring out what would be helpful for licensees. As I said, I'm not a licensee myself. I don't really see the same pages and information that you all may work with as you go through the renewal process. So thank you for letting me know, and I will talk to my staff, and I'll talk to CE Broker and see how we can make some improvements.
Thank you.
In terms of other operations updates, I just want to let you know, I mentioned it briefly, but we are in the process of moving to the new licensing system. That is, the state passed a bill about a year ago, and we are moving to Acela. And our process to do that is working with the state vendor for IT services, the Office of Information Technology Services, OITS. They have been meeting with us since January, and we are in the discovery phase where they are going through and making sure that they understand all of our current processes. And that means going through all of our existing forms for all the levels of licensure, for all the professions, and any other process we wish to have automated in the system. And they have built, they call them stories, but essentially walking through each step in the process to make sure they're not missing something that would need to be built into the system as a question. And then the next step will be taking this, looking for duplication and looking to see how we can take these steps and build them into the system to allow people to apply for licensure electronically, making sure that a lot of things that we do separately are going to be integrated, making sure the payment is part of that process. So this should reduce some of the manual issues we run into when we have solutions for lots of different things, but it means pulling all these things together. This system should do a lot of that for us. Now, there are about 10 states that have already said they want to move this direction. We are agency number 7 in that list of 10. And so the Real Estate Commission was the first one. They have gone live. They are working through some of the initial growing pains of opening the new system, but we're trying to learn from them so that when we go live, we won't experience some of those same issues. A lot of the agencies that are in the process of working towards going live are smaller than the BSRB. So we can learn from some of those things, but given how complex our licensure system is, part of this we may not know until we fully go live. But they've said it'll be about another year to a year and a half before we have the opportunity to finish all the building, testing, and then going live. So I'll let you know as we get closer to that date, but I'm really excited about the system. It should be nice and it should provide more benefits for applicants and hopefully better tools for licensees. Like I said, I think the API with the e-broker is something that we want to build into the system to help out with the renewal process. So I'm looking forward to it, but just a little bit of a ways away. And then another item in terms of operations, some of this you may not see, but at the BSRB office, we're limited with how much physical space we have for different things. We have made a number of good steps forward over the last few years to update our document retention policies, to transfer a lot of our older paper records to the state archive instead of holding them here at the office. We are in the process now of taking steps towards being able to retain our records in electronic form versus paper form. The state has really pushed the last few years on continuity of operations plans in case there would be something like a fire or a tornado to a state building. How could you relocate and then begin to provide services again in a real seamless or at least as functional way as possible? And so to do that, we've really been trying to reduce the amount of paper records that we have here. And then once we can convert to digital, that'll be helpful for us as well. There'll need to be some things in place like offsite storage and appropriate scanners, and we've been taking some steps towards that. So like I said, you may not see any of this in the front end, but I think behind the scenes, I want you to know, all this work that we're doing, it does take away from the time that the licensing staff has to process applications. So we're trying to make sure that there's no delays while we're working on this, but it's really important for the infrastructure of the agency. And I think it'll be beneficial going forward. But some of this is just good cleanup and good practices for an agency. I want to make you aware that it's taking place as well.
So, David, I just want to say I appreciate you helping lead the agency into the 21st century, because it took you as a catalyst to be able to help try to move things forward and have that as priority. And I think everyone on this call and every licensee in Kansas, whether or not they're a behavior analyst or LCSW or, addictions counselor or whatever, would appreciate the an online preliminary application process and being able to have it seamlessly integrate so that maybe forms auto-populate. That's bringing this agency up to where it should be, instead of the archaic method of pen and paper submissions. So I bet your staff appreciate it too. So thank you for that leadership.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I think we have some short-term goals and some long-term goals. And I'm excited to see us moving in this direction. It has been a goal since I started to have electronic applications. And unfortunately, it's a difficult process to get to that point. But I think we have a timeline now to where we can move that direction. And even though a lot of this work is really tedious, it's still valuable. And I think it will help us out once we get close to launching, to make sure that, if you've ever launched a new system, you know that there's certain things until you go live that you do the best and you cross your fingers and you hope that everything is built into it. You won't have to do too many fixes. But I've really been happy with the work of my staff and the work of OITS. I think they've got a really good process in place. So I'm really optimistic about it. Just a couple notes about the board meeting that we had last month in May. I wanted to make you aware, you spent a lot of time as an advisory committee with very good, thoughtful discussion on the unprofessional conduct regulations for your profession. And then those recommended changes were forwarded to the board. And then you received a packet of material with all of the recommended changes from all the different professions. So you could see what they did to see if you wanted to make any additional changes. And those recommendations were forwarded back to the board. That process has not been forgotten about. What has been going on recently at the board meetings is that in working with some of my staff members here at the office, we developed a giant grid of all of the unprofessional conduct regulations for all 7 professions. And for each one of those items, we have language side by side that you can see across all 7 professions, as well as a column of potential recommended language if the board would like to have consistent language across all the 7 professions. And so what's been happening recently at past board meetings, and including the meeting that happened in May, The board is going item by item and discussing the language, discussing the uniquenesses of each profession to see if that language should be standardized or if there should be reasons why one profession may have this unique item and others don't, or whether it should be worded a certain way based on some of the different aspects of the profession. So we are approaching the end of this process. I think once the board finishes that process, we'll be able to put this language out for public comment and review, and then ultimately the board will need to vote to adopt this new language after it's had the opportunity for other individuals to review it, provide public comment. But right now, it's an exciting step in the process because while it took a lot of work to get to this point, for some of those professions that have been licensed by the BSRB for many years, there had not been updates to the unprofessional conduct standards in over 20 years. And so this was definitely work that was necessary, and I would say in some cases overdue, but I'm glad that we are close to having real good language that will help our licensees understand the expectations better and help members of the public more clearly understand some of these different areas where if there's a question about was this the standard or was it substandard or something that might constitute grounds for a complaint, maybe it'll be helpful for them to understand the responsibilities of practitioners. And so really looking forward to that being close to being finished. I think probably they'll continue to work on it through the rest of this year. Some of that work may be at the out-of-town board meeting because this work does take time. And the board did comment on that. That's the last update I want to provide to you from the board meeting, is that once a year, the board likes to get together in person and have an all-day meeting where they can work on items that may take some additional time. And we have moved this out-of-town board meeting around the state. The first year that I was assisting the board, it was very early in the pandemic, so we had to do it online. The next year it was in Kansas City, then it was in Wichita. Last year it was in Lawrence. This year it will be in Manhattan, Kansas. And so the all-day out-of-town board meeting will be on Monday, September 29th. It'll probably start around 9 o'clock in the morning and then go as late as it needs to. Usually they wrap up though around 3:30 or 4, sometimes as late as 5. But that all-day meeting, the board will have an opportunity to talk about any items for legislative agenda, but also topics that might just take in-depth discussion and consideration for them to review. So that has been put on the calendar. In terms of the specific location, we're still working on an agreement with hotels for the location, but we've decided it's going to be in Manhattan, and it will be on that Monday. It is open to the public, even though it is an off-site meeting. So if any individuals want to attend that meeting in person, they are welcome to do so. So with that, I will go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions on the items I discussed or any other topics. I don't see any questions. So Linda, I'll turn it back over.
All right. I said, I don't see any questions either. Yeah, that was a very clear report. So now we're going to move on to old business. Are there items that, are you good with this flow, David? Or was there something? Yes. Okay. So now we're going to look at the review and discussion on the draft survey of licensees. If you all remember, we reviewed and David published a survey, and we got through part of it last time. And I think there's a couple of questions in there, David, that you would like people to review for next time.
Yes, and I apologize. I did forget to mention one item, but actually there was an additional document. I want to make sure you all got it in your email. We'll talk about it when we get to the artificial intelligence conversations here under old business. So just want to make sure it was listed as item number 4 in your packet of materials, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. For the survey of the behavior analyst, we did publish that in draft form. We have a report that summarizes a lot of the takeaways from that survey, and the document is still in draft form. We will probably do some extra analysis and extra summary of some of these topics and a little bit of cleanup in terms of just kind of how the information is displayed and do a check to make sure. We tried to use the template for different professions for the future professions. We were creating these survey reports for all 6 professions that had the survey. So there's quite a bit of work that went into the creation of these draft reports, but we do want to have good, clean final reports that will be something that we can resource over or look back on over time. So we'll do some additional cleanup, but it's still okay to look at this information. All of the appendices with that information, that should not change. So as we talked about last meeting, some of these questions were multiple choice, some of them were open-ended. For the ones that were open-ended, we didn't want people to be intimidated by the size of the document or the information that was presented. So instead of going question by question with all the responses, what we did is we tried to summarize the responses and then on the back end provide the additional information as the appendices. So if you wanted to look deeper into some of that information, you were able to do so, but you could also have sort of a short summary at the beginning. And so we went through these questions last time. There's a lot of really good information. I thought for the meeting today, if individuals had things they wanted to discuss in terms of any kind of reflections after having reviewed the entire report last time, if you had any high-level comments, we could talk about those today. I realize there's a lot of different material in here, and I don't want to shorten the conversation. I think there's a lot of different topics that are worthy of additional conversation. So what I've done with the other advisory committees is at these meetings in June, we've had some preliminary high-level conversation about the survey results, but then we've also designed a plan of attack in terms of breaking this down into smaller pieces that we could look at for future meetings. So for future meetings, what I would recommend is that we take a look at 2 questions. And so there are 2 questions in particular that I would want the advisory committee to be thinking about. And I could tell you kind of the areas that the other professions had focused on. And you could look at the same 2 questions, or you could look at a couple other questions if you wanted to. But for the other professions, what we asked them to research for the next advisory committee was the question that said, it was question 15 on page 17. And that question asked, over the past 2 years, based on your observations and experience, practicing in the behavior analysis profession, could you share information on any practice-related issues you have seen, such as areas where practitioners appeared to need more continuing education or training in a certain area? And then the other question we had the advisory committees focused on for next time had to do with question on supervision, which is question number 17, and that's on page 20. And we asked, over the last 2 years, have you experienced any negative issues involving supervision? If so, please explain. So for next time, if we could have advisory committee members focus on those 2 questions, review the summary information, but also dig into the open-ended responses in those appendix, and be ready to discuss those too. But for the conversation today, I know maybe individuals had reflections on other questions, or maybe following our meeting last time, there were things that you considered to think about or review in the report. So I'll pause here and see if any members of the committee have thoughts or comments about the report as an entire report. That's for discussion today. So I'll pause here and see if there's discussion on the report.
When do you anticipate that you're going to have, I might have missed this, when we're going to have a little bit more analytics on this report so that we could digest it?
Yeah, so this is in draft form. Information in the appendices will probably not change because that was just the responses from the individual who answered the survey questions. I would think by the end of this month, we should be able to convert this from a draft report to the final report, provide a little bit more summary information and a little bit more cleanup, and then convert that to the final report. We also hope to have a comparison report between the professions. So we did do a survey of 6 of the professions. social work, we have done 2 different surveys over the last few years. The most recent was done in January of 24. So because of how recent that survey was, we did not survey the social workers this time around. But based on all of this good information and further conversation, we thought, these questions are different enough and this information is really valuable. And it would be helpful for us to have across the board information for all 7 professions. So at the advisory committee meeting for social workers last week, I proposed that we include a lot of these same questions for the social work profession and issue that survey here in the near future. And they were supportive of that. So I think we're going to put out a little survey just for social workers that deals with the questions we had not asked about previously. And then once we collect that information, we'll be able to also include responses from social workers. That way we can have all 7 professions in terms of that comparative report. So in terms of your question for this report, I think we can have a final version of this report based on the responses from behavior analysts at the end of this month. For the comparison report, it will probably be at the earliest the end of July. If we can collect all that information from the social workers and then be able to turn it around quickly. If not, then maybe we can at least provide a draft with some additional comparisons between professions, and then maybe a little bit later in the final report.
So what I would ask you guys to do too is to look at the report, and if you have any suggestions on different comparisons that you think would be useful for review, to let David know. I think when the high-end summary of do you operate in a rural or an urban area, that's useful, but I know that we have responses on here for which counties that you practice in. So if we had a heat map of where those counties were and how many behavior analysts, like for each dot in that heat map, right? You could either have 2 dots if there's 2 behavior analysts in that area, or 5, or have it be a different color or something like that, because I know that part of what would be nice to come out of this is that we would have something that we could also share with our state partners who are responsible for work capacity. I know that that is an area of interest for some of our state agencies. And if, as the Kansas Regulatory Board, if we could provide information to those people that could help with maybe passing that information also on to the managed care organizations for where they could target recruitment and enrollment to be able to help serve Kansans, right? So I don't know, is that a use of this report that you think would be within the purview of the board to do?
Yeah, I think so. I think, once we wrap it up, our goal is to have the board have some items for the board to work on in the future and the advisory committees, and then have some things that may be outside of our jurisdiction, but at least this could be helpful information we can pass and start conversations with new partners. And
yeah.
So I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know KDADs would be interested in it, and I believe that DCF, or which falls under, I think, more in line with on the behavioral health side, would be.
Linda, that work group, the autism task team work group that we're on, I've been trying to pull anybody and everybody that I think should be part of that. I do think the BSRB should be at least privy to the conversations that we're having, because it is a workforce task force as well. I'm happy to connect David and Cora. I've literally just been emailing Cora with sets of people like KCDD. I emailed Ashley Beeson. There's a bunch of other people that I was trying to get her connected with, because we need all of the right players on that one. And I think this is a workforce issue, and I think he might have valuable information. Not that he needs to consistently attend that meeting, but I think it would be good to have his insight on that.
Yeah, I think it would be too.
Okay, sorry to volunteer you, David. Sending you an email.
That's okay. Yeah, feel free. part of this is we're trying to develop some new relationships with different people. I think I've been part of a group working with other members of KDAS and the Board of Regents as we've been talking about workforce solutions and studying what's going on in other states. And I think we're trying to move past the conversation where we say, is it something that's under the jurisdiction of the BSRB? Oh, no. Okay. Well, then we will step out of this conversation versus, well, we can, help each other and we can
Right.
educate ourselves in more of these areas. And then, the reimbursement topic has really not been something under the jurisdiction of the BSRB. We don't really have any opposition to reimbursements. It's just not something under our control or jurisdiction. But we've been trying to at least help the people that have more control over that understand the professions better and some of our requirements, so that if they are looking for, what other states are able to compensate for, they have a better understanding of what we have here under our licensure requirements. So more conversations, never a bad thing. So I'm happy to be connected with some people from that group.
Anything else? So your marching orders are for next meeting to review question 15 and 17. Christy, just because you're no longer going to be on the board doesn't mean that you don't have to review those questions as well. Just thought I'd make sure you understand that you're still governed by our marching orders.
Mike, you too.
That was
Oh,
like
that's
the
right.
one time in this whole meeting you cut out, Linda, on my end. I couldn't hear what you were saying, but I'm sure it was something sassy.
And Allison pointed out, Mike, you and Mike did not accept the next year appointment to the board. So you guys still have to review questions 15 and 17 and send us your thoughts on it. So you have to review it between now and July 1st, because that's when your commission ends, or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And send your thoughts on question 15 and 17 to David before July 1st.
I gotcha.
Noted.
All right. Okay. If there's no other discussion on the draft survey, then we can move on to the next line item, which is continued regulation of artificial intelligence. David had some information that would be, I think, in your best interest to know that it's floating around out there. And then late last night, it was, I don't know, it was after 11, wasn't it? I got an email from my department chair with an article about artificial intelligence and forwarded that to David, and he forwarded it on to you guys. So there's that article that's in there as well. So David, would you like to share some of the more recent information that you have on AI?
Sure. And I know you've been provided a lot of different handouts and other material as it relates to AI. I just wanted to keep you updated on a couple new bits of information, one at the state level and one at the federal level. So concerning state level, there was a forum that was put on by a group called the Information Network of Kansas. They're also known as INC. And INC provides certain services to state agencies. For example, they assisted us in creating our payment portal on the BSRB website. So they look to see what needs state agencies have and try to connect them with partners or develop those resources to assist state agencies. And as part of this forum that I attended, they were talking conceptually about future resources they may be able to provide to state agencies. One of them dealt with the topic of artificial intelligence. And one of the topics that they mentioned at the meeting was, they said there may be information on your website that you would like to make more accessible to individuals, or perhaps allow individuals to find it more easily without clicking through multiple pages to get to like an FAQ section on your website. And the idea would be to develop a very basic AI chatbot for your website that would have the same information as the FAQ sections, but would allow individuals to access the information in maybe a more user-friendly way. Now, I had not thought about using a chatbot for that function. And for me, I like to go page by page, but I also understand that as there are differences in individuals, and this might be a tool that people in other generations or other groups, or maybe just people in the future would enjoy using, or perhaps for accessibility reasons, the chatbot may be more beneficial too. And so I'm keeping an open mind on that and trying to listen to what they're developing on the state level. It doesn't exist currently, but I thought that was an interesting concept of a way to take AI and apply it to some of our existing functionality without it getting too deep into areas in which we have some concern about. There's also a federal note that I want to make you aware of too, as we've been going through this process and looking at artificial intelligence and some guidance from some of the different associations on ways to regulate artificial intelligence. There have been some states that have passed restrictions or requirements on artificial intelligence as well. At the federal level, from what I understand, and my understanding is limited in this area because I have reviewed some articles, but there may be some distinctions that I still need to learn on this topic. But it appears that there was an appropriations bill that included a provision that if this federal appropriations bill was passed, it would limit states' ability to regulate artificial intelligence for 10 years. And so I don't know if there is something in the weeds of that language that makes it a little bit different, but it appeared to be a broad restriction from what I was seeing. And the article that I read was a number of states are opposing that provision. So I don't know if it'll actually get put into law. It seems like it's still a little ways away from that becoming a reality because it would still need to stay in the bill as it goes through the Senate. And there is opposition to that now. So if that would be passed, it is my understanding that would interfere with our ability to do what we're currently being asked to do in terms of reviewing artificial intelligence and recommending to the board ways in which we could regulate artificial intelligence. So I want to make you aware of that conversation at the federal level. If any of you have been tracking that conversation, if you have some additional details, like I said, that's not an area that I really kind of hold myself out in as far as being an expert on those topics. But as I see articles and I review information, I want to make sure you're informed of that information too. So if you have comments or thoughts, I want to give you the opportunity if you have any additional information on that topic specifically, if you want to share anything.
Denise
So
seemed
David,
to
that's-
have, oh,
Go
sorry. Go ahead, Denise.
I was just going to say, I think that's part of that big, beautiful bill, right? The budget reconciliation. Yeah.
Yes, I believe so.
A lot of the House members have said that when it comes back, it's going to come back to the House. When it comes back, they're going to oppose that specific piece of that. Is what my understanding was. Oh, I have to find a charger. It just yelled at me.
Well, thank you for that additional information. Yes, it's my understanding that it was included in that appropriations bill that Denise that you referenced, and like I said, I believe it's a pretty broad provision. So I assume it would there be a conflict of law with the states that have already passed things, and then for those that are discussing a lot of things right now, there would be some complications. But I don't think that it means we can't continue to have conversations on this topic. I think we should still continue to focus on artificial intelligence and talk about possible recommendations. And if there is something that is passed that would limit our ability to, for the board to implement any of these, I'll keep you informed, but I think we should still be able to continue our conversation at this point. So, but as
Somebody at that meeting point out that Illinois had passed something about saying that notes were generated by a non-human.
yeah, Linda, I think you're referencing a comment from the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee in that discussion. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think, and I'm not sure I'm going to recall this 100%, but it seems like there was a comment someone had referenced Illinois passing a law that mentioned that artificial intelligence would not be able to provide therapy or something like
And that, yeah, something like non-human. It's a non-human interaction or something like that because AI is getting so sophisticated, it's hard to tell between when you're talking to a real person and AI. And so there are already laws being passed about this. And I just think this committee, I'm glad to see that there was a couple of members that were already familiar with that. But I think it's important for us as a community to know that there is that possibility that the federal government will pass legislation that makes it impossible for us in Kansas to try to monitor the use of AI. And if you, for 10 years, and if you think about AI and how fast things have been changing, 10 years from now, we might as well be back in caveman days, right? If we can't do anything, because there's going to be so much that changes in 10 years and potential harm that is done if we don't have our finger on the pulse of it, and that hopefully we're proactive in helping to guide what's the parameters or the guardrails that are around the use of that in our industry. I just think it's important. So, and then hot off the press, there's that other document that David sent out that I think it would be good to read this and look at it particularly because a lot of us are involved in autism care. And this is specifically about the use of AI with when working with autistic individuals or in the care of people with autism. So it's got ethical and practical considerations and the potential for, I mean, like on page, I don't know what page this is, 9, AI in the clinical environment, enhancing diagnostic care, talking about reading facial cues and, trying to predict emotional responses, and AI augmented learning in applied behavior analysis, or AI ABA, right? So I also think that it's pretty important to keep our finger on the pulse of this, and I think this is a good summary for us. Do you guys want to continue to discuss this and maybe look at this document in more detail over the next month? And I don't know what kind of recommendations we could make to the board about the use of AI, particularly when dealing with vulnerable populations, with regards to guardrails. So do we want to keep this as a topic for discussion? Yes? Yes, I would.
As long as we're allowed to, please and thank you.
Yes.
I say yes. And in the same vein of legislation being passed that restricts what we can do, I think the conversation about DEI, continuing education, and professional ethics would be beneficial to keep on the roster as well.
I agree, Christy. And David, do you want to share with our advisory committee what happened with psychology in Kansas?
For the DEI continuing education?
And yeah, versus diagnostics and yeah.
Sure. So this goes back a few years. This is probably for the, we probably have to go back to 2021. I think is probably when this conversation really started. But there were some representatives from the Kansas Psychological Association that submitted materials, and I think maybe even provided public comment at a Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee meeting, advocating for continuing education in DEI topic. And the board discussed that, and at the time they said, we don't have a recommendation for the board to have this across the board for all professions, but because of the advocates from KPA who had requested that the psychology profession support this as a change to continuing education requirements, the board recommended that there be a new 3-hour requirement in the area of DEI. And this was back in a bill that was before the legislature, I believe, in 2022. And so at the time, that was put forward as one of the items from the board in that bill. The legislature asked a lot of questions about it in committee, and I believe ultimately it was a Senate committee that decided, no, let's remove that provision. And so they struck that from the bill in the committee in 2022. And ultimately that bill that originally included it was not even brought to the floor to be worked by the Senate. And so we were able to take the other two provisions that were unrelated. And then on the House side, we were able to get those passed that session, but it took a lot of work. And it was my opinion that because we had included that provision that dealt with DEI, it was very challenging for us to get the other items through legislation that year. But thankfully, we were able to do that through a lot of hard work behind the scenes. In the next year, we had, KPA was still advocating for continuing education in that area. I believe there might have also been individuals from NASW Kansas that were advocating for it for the social work profession. Ultimately, at the board's out-of-town meeting that year, which I think was in the fall of 2022, one item that I brought to the board was saying, we had brought this forward for the psychology profession. The previous year, the legislature had removed it from the bill in committee, and it appeared to create challenges for us to get other items through the legislature because of it being included. And the proposal that I had made to the board at that time in the fall of 2022 was potentially, if there is a recommendation from the board to alter continuing education requirements, perhaps what there could be is maybe, let's say, an elective in one of about 5 categories. And as research for that, I had studied continuing education requirements in a lot of different states. And I saw that, while in Kansas, we have 3 hours in ethics and we have a certain amount of hours in diagnosis and treatment, some other states include things on, let's say, suicide prevention, or they include hours on working with veterans, or potentially even working with individuals in, rural populations or things like that. And so what I proposed to the board at the time at the out-of-town board meeting was more of an elective type choice where you have to pick, 1 out of 5 different categories that could include the DEI category, or working with veterans, or suicide prevention, or rural populations. And I think there might have been a few others potentially to choose from, but I was proposing to the board maybe limiting that to about 5, and then seeing if they wanted to advocate for that in a bill the following year. And the board had a discussion about it. Ultimately, it was the board's position to go ahead and advocate for 3 hours in cultural diversity training. And the board also did not want there to be too many hours that were required in specific areas, because there was a thought of, if you require hours in too many areas, there may not be flexibility for people to take hours towards their individual professions. And so the idea was to propose reducing the number of hours from 6 to 3 in diagnosis and treatment, and then as a new 3-hour requirement, 3 hours in the cultural diversity continuing education. And so that was the proposal the board included in their bill for the 2023 legislative session. Ultimately, what happened was the legislature heard that in a House committee, and what the House committee did is they struck the new proposal for the 3 hours in cultural diversity training across the professions, but they said, we would also like to limit the number of hours in diagnosis and treatment to 3 hours instead of the existing 6 hours. And so they did a delayed implementation of that. And if you got a recent message from me from the BSRB, it talked about the new change from the 6 hours to the 3 hours starting July 1st of 2025, because the legislature did make that change then in 2023, but it had a delayed implementation. So now we're getting close to that date when that new item will be, they'll go live. So want to give you a little bit of the history of that. The board has brought the proposals forward twice, in large part because of the advocacy of the associations. But unfortunately, both times there was strong legislative opposition both times. And just behind the scenes, I can let you know there were members of the legislature that made our process really challenging and difficult because we included those items in the bill. And so I think the board has a certain responsibility to have conversations on this. And at a national level, when I go and attend national meetings from the different associations, this topic is very important to a lot of different states and a lot of different associations. I can just tell you from my experience at the Capitol, it has been more than a hard sell. It has been something that has been impossible for us to move forward in legislation, and it has threatened our ability to have other items passed in front of the legislature. It has been that strong of opposition. And that is, back in 22 and 23. That is even before the recent changes on the federal level that have dealt with the federal executive orders. And so while I don't disagree that this is an item that is still important, I just want you to know sort of how carefully sometimes we walk in these areas, because we definitely want to make sure that we are still able to have good conversations on these topics, and they are important, but it could result in us and our ability to not have things passed by the legislature, which would also be, damaging in other areas too. So it's a delicate walk to walk.
It's pretty defeating, but we can't let it defeat us, I guess is what I want to say, right? I'm not sure, and this is a legal question and probably outside the purview of this committee, but I'm not sure how legislators who have relatively little knowledge about our field and what we do, how they can regulate what we want to require as a profession for our continuing ed. And then for me, it was a snafu where in order to not put additional requirements on psychologists, they took the 3 hours off the diagnostics and added the DEI. So the number of CEs you needed remained the same, and they still threw it out. It's like, so it's going to, thank you, Christy, for bringing that up. It's going to continue to need us to not let our voice become muffled. And I just think if it doesn't come from us, who does it come from? So.
Well, and Linda, to your point there, when we say us, it can mean different things. All of you that sit on this committee, I think at the moment are all licensees. I know at times there have been non-licensed members of the advisory committee, but you all, wear multiple hats. And so in this context of the, Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee, your role here is to assist the work of the board and the BSRB, and a lot of that deals with the public protection mission of the board. But you are also licensees, and I know a number of you work in other different groups that are more advocacy groups, maybe for the profession, or that are exploring other things outside of your role on this committee. So, so Linda, when you talk about us, we are somewhat limited in terms of the role as an advisory committee. That does not necessarily mean that you as individuals in other roles, or you as individuals outside of this membership on the committee, are held to the same restrictions in that way. So.
But I think we can still be squeaky wheels. It's if every time we meet and we make a recommendation to the board and it keeps coming up over and over and over again, that's sort of what I meant by not letting our voice be muffled, because after a while, people, and it's based in our science, right? It's extinction. Our behavior, if it's not reinforced, is going to go away. And I'm advocating for us to not let that happen to us as a group and to keep that going. So, and continue to make recommendations to the board that the inclusion of DEI is important. So I don't think, and actually I sort of had a question, and I don't want to derail the meeting, but when we were talking about the CE brokers, I know that for some of the professions, there's in statute, I don't know if that's the right language, that says you have to have this, and this as CEs. And I think the only requirement we have for Kansas LBAs is with regards to ethics. Is that accurate?
That's correct. So
Okay.
it's interesting. The total number of hours is not in statute, but the specific hours in ethics and for the other professions, the hour, in diagnosis and treatment, those hours are in the statute. So that is why that change was something the legislature did in 2023. For the total number of hours, that is something that's in the regulation. So we have more flexibility to change the total number of hours in terms of the hours of diagnosis and treatment and the hours of ethics. That's something that probably for us to adjust would need to go in front of the legislature.
Anyway, just something for us as the advisory group to consider.
I do think it is important that we continue to have these conversations. So I continue to leave it on the agenda, even if we're like, yep, it's still there. Let's go ahead and write it back down and send it up there again, because it is extinction, Linda. That's exactly what it is. And I'm a very stubborn human. So I'm vehemently against like this compliance ahead of time. Even if we think they're going to say no, if it's something that we as a advisory committee think is important, which I think I'm pretty certain everybody here does, then it is something that we need to continue to be persistent about. The same thing I'm being persistent about the TCM thing, the same way, like each of us kind of have our own thing that we're persistent about. I think this is one that we can all collectively agree is important given what our other regulatory body has done in response to this. So
yeah,
I think it's something that we can continue to be annoying about.
Yeah.
And I'm a very annoying human. So if it needs to be me, I will do it.
Squeaky wheel. So, all right. Anything else on that topic for right now? So, David, I think that recommendation would be.
Oh.
Sorry. Someone was saying something?
Yeah, I think my internet might not be great, so I apologize if I'm accidentally interrupting folks. But I just wanted to say, as a departing member, that David, that felt like a horror story that you just told me, and definitely defeating in regard to like my perception of rational and kind human beings. But I do appreciate the work that you've done, David, that you explained with the committee, or advocating in the legislature. I do appreciate that the psychologists were pushing and continuing to push even when they were initially rejected, and saw more hardship after that initial rejection. And this conversation that the board just had, Allison, you are not annoying, but you are certainly stubborn. And Linda, I know you are too. And I really appreciate that the board values this initiative, and definitely want to encourage and support you guys continuing to push for it. And if you want to put it on like the meeting as like the Christie legacy, talk about DEI every meeting, that would make me so happy. So I appreciate what you're doing for Kansans, and just because I'm stepping away, I will be cheering you guys on from the sidelines and maybe checking up on you in the YouTube live streams to make sure.
I would love to have someone view us on YouTube. Do it, Christy.
Yeah. So David, can we just put that on? Because I know on one of the previous meetings, we had discussion topics for the upcoming year. Let's keep this on there.
Okay.
And I like that, the Christie legacy. Continue to discuss Christie and their legacy. All right. So now, all right. Number 5C, old business. the website. I know that we had played around with it just a little bit, with AI, by the way, to generate a description, of our profession for the public. We sort of need to get that nailed down for David, because that's how we're going to show David how much we appreciate him, is by getting a description of our field nailed down so he can take it and update the website. So how do you want to proceed with this, David?
You know, I think maybe if I could just get a couple of volunteers that I could talk to in between this and the next meeting, we could kind of come up with some proposed language, and then the advisory committee could review it at the next meeting. I think that would be helpful. I have a pretty good idea as far as some of the language for the behavior analyst, but for the assistant behavior analyst, I'd kind of like to draw out a little bit more of the distinction between those two levels of licensing. So, I guess, are there a couple of volunteers that I could just kind of have a phone call with, or maybe just meet informally in between now and the next meeting and talk about some language to bring back to the board, the advisory committee?
I'm happy to do that with you.
Okay, thanks, Kelly.
I'm interested in helping on that too, David.
Okay, well, thank you, Pam. So I'll tell you what, I will reach out
You
to
can add me too, David, if you need a third.
Alex.
Okay. Thank you, Alec.
Yeah.
You are on my hit list, but Kelly and Pam were, if nobody volunteered, I was going to say, well, is it my job to assign it to people?
No, I appreciate
Keep
you
you in
all.
mind for future, Alec.
Yeah, thank you each for volunteering. I'll reach out, and we can put something together that we can have the advisory committee maybe vote on next time. So.
All right. That was relatively painless. Thank you very much. All right, so now we're moving on into new business. We're coming up on 2:30-ish, so we only have 35 minutes left. I think there are a couple of hot topics that like 6B and C that may need to go to our next meeting, because I really want to leave a lot of time to talk about that, and I guess maybe it won't take too long. But I think maybe, David, if you just give them the update on 6D, because I think that's going to be relatively quick, then we can move on to 6A and look through the resumes.
Yeah.
How does that sound? Is everybody okay with that little brief change? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And so what I wanted to inform and update the advisory committee about, we had talked about whether the board should have an additional requirement of a jurisprudence exam for the professions regulated by the board. And the jurisprudence exam in other states is something that some states require as a way to make sure that individuals are knowledgeable about the certain rules and certain laws, sometimes as it relates to unprofessional conduct, sometimes as it relates to the requirements for licensure, or things that people run into when they're renewing their license, that sometimes there's mistakes that are made. So there is a definite value to having a jurisprudence process. As we researched this in other states, we found that some states develop their own tests, usually for a fee. Some states outsource it, and then a private company will develop an examination. Sometimes it's a module that people will work through, sometimes a test, but usually both for a fee. We really don't want to charge any fees to licensees unless we absolutely have to. And so we were trying to figure out how to balance what the board's interest in individuals knowing this information versus our interest in having fees as low as possible and not adding any additional fees or requirements for licensure if we don't have to. And so our alternative that we had talked about a few meetings ago was to launch a series of optional webinars that dealt with the same topics that jurisprudence exams would cover. We would create this by, staff of the BSRB, and we would essentially do this live 4 times a year, different questions for each profession. but hopefully individuals would voluntarily want to do this, and we give them a free hour of continuing education for taking part in this process. And we're hoping to have different questions for each of these quarterly webinars, that there is a benefit if people want to attend all of them, or if they can just attend some of them. Well, now we're to the point where I think we can start building this. And so what I've asked each of the advisory committee members to do, I've been looking for, again, about 2 volunteers from the advisory committees that I could meet with informally outside the meetings to take the principles and concepts that I've learned from our investigators and also our licensing staff and build some good language around these questions. And so, so that's kind of what I will just want to update you, and that's where we're at in the process. I think we're close to building this. I just need some assistance in terms of some language. And like I said, I've done this with each of the other advisory committees. I just kind of would like to build some language and kind of thinking about it from each of the professions' perspectives. It would be helpful for me to have a couple people I could talk to as we're kind of building these questions from the concepts to the actual things we'll talk about during those webinars. So I know 3 of you already volunteered for the first item. And so if any of you would want to volunteer for this instead, let me know. I'll take volunteers right now if anyone is interested.
Do I need to be on the advisory committee, or can I volunteer someone that's on a different board?
Right now, I'd like to start with the advisory committee.
Okay, can we put me down and I'll just drag Megan into it? How about that? How does that sound?
That sounds good. Okay, I have Allison down. Is there anyone else who would want to volunteer? In terms of the time commitment, I'm thinking maybe half an hour to an hour once a month, but this would not be an official meeting. It would just be kind of a phone call or a Zoom meeting. Just kind of, I'll bring the concepts that we talked about and maybe even some potential language, and we'll kind of work through this. So it'd be kind of a better series of questions that I could go through during these webinars.
David, I would be happy to volunteer for that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Emily. So I will be in touch once I start setting these up and I have a little bit more information as far as the logistics. But I'm excited about it. I think we're getting close. And I think I've said this before, this is not something modeled after any other state and what they're currently doing. This is outside the box, and I'm excited about it, but yeah, it's different. And so we'll be figuring it out as we go, but I think it has a lot of potential. And if it's successful, potentially it's something that we could propose to other states, and maybe it'd be a model they could use as well.
So thank you, Emily. I was picking on you, but you couldn't hear it because I was muted. But David, and I wouldn't mind being on this committee as well, as long as or the sub group or whatever. It would be interesting as we put this together to be able to draw from some of the examples that have come up on some of what gets reported to us, and the process that goes into making that decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's really important that people out there understand how these guiding principles work as a licensed professional in the field. Does anybody remember where David came up with this idea? It's when he attended APBA last year. So, and I'm thrilled, right? So he's taking the information that he learned at one of our conferences, and he's using it to develop a testing situation to encourage engagement by how? Positive reinforcement, right? So it's free, plus you get a CE. That's important. So I would like to once again point out that our illustrious leader, David Fye, is embracing our science and using it to a good end to increase participation and knowledge of the laws and regulations that govern our behavior. So I think that's kudos to you, David.
Well,
and thank you guys for all your volunteering. All right. Having said that, any other questions on that? Nope. All right. Then let's move on to number 6A. And we have 2 positions, correct, David?
That is correct. And I can probably frame this conversation in about a minute, if that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. So in your packet of material, you have a copy of the advisory committee policy. It does show some guidance in terms of the composition of the advisory committee and also things to keep in mind when considering new members to recommend to the advisory committee. According to the policy, you have the board member for the profession who serves as chair, if there is a board member from that profession. In this case, Linda as a psychologist, but also a licensed behavior analyst. She serves as the chair of the advisory committee. There's also a public board member on the advisory committee. And then it states there should be between 3 and 10 non-board members on the advisory committee. And so currently you have 10, but 2 individuals are leaving the advisory committee at the end of their term, which ends at the end of June. So there would be 2 openings on the advisory committee. And so you would be able to recommend as many as 2 people if you wanted to have the maximum amount of individuals on the committee. And individuals serve 2-year terms. On the website, it does indicate the current city of the current advisory committee members. So one of the things to think about is also, geographic disbursement across the state in terms of the current members of the advisory committee and future members. And so officially, the advisory committee has the authority to make recommendations on new members. And so if you come up with recommendations today, what I would do is draft a letter on your behalf that would describe the process. And then I would forward that to the chair of the board, who has the ultimate authority to appoint individuals to the advisory committee. And if the chair had any questions, she could speak with Linda as chair of the advisory committee. But ultimately, if there's no issues, then those individuals could be appointed to the advisory committee at the next full board meeting, which would be at the end of July next month. And so if they are appointed next month, they could start attending meetings as early as the August advisory committee meeting. So during this process, it doesn't say if you have to take a formal vote or if you have to reach consensus. I've seen both processes used. Sometimes it's good to say, what are the members that stood out the most when you reviewed these applicants that you think would be the best to recommend to the advisory committee? And a natural consensus can just kind of occur from that, but other processes could be used as well. I don't typically participate in the discussion or the recommendation. I just make sure that the right policies and procedures are followed. So unless there's questions, I'll turn it back over to Linda and then you can discuss the applicants for the advisory committee.
David, didn't you say that there were a handful of these people that have applied previously? Does
Yeah.
that even matter?
Yeah.
I would like to know, I know that Holly has applied before. I didn't recognize anybody else's names from the last time. This is gonna sound selfish. I'm gonna say it anyway. I would like to see some diversity on both. I would like to see diversity 1 and 2. I would also like diversity across our groups. So like people that are serving on, like there's some people that had applied that have not served on KanSAB or are not part of Kansas Grassroots or are not part of KCDD or KMAP or any of these other like groups that we've all served on. And I have a lot more interest in having them join because they have diverse perspectives that maybe aren't being shared in other groups. Does that make sense?
It does. What I told David was that, just looking at people that were outside the inner circle, right? People, because all of us have all served on these state level committees and all done, that type of work for a long time now. And it would be nice to get people across. I want to make sure that we have geographic representation, but also diverse perspectives. I agree.
Thank you.
So-
Okay. I was like, that's gonna sound really rude, but if I've worked with them on other groups, I kind of know what their stances are. And so having
Mhm.
new blood, that's probably not the right word, but like new infusion of ideas is important in the selection
Yeah.
process. And now
So having said that, Holly Kramer is from out west. There was another one in here. Who was it? They're from Paola, which is, not,
Amanda Martell.
And real quick,
Yeah.
there was a question of which individuals had applied before.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have that information? So Holly Creamer and
Mhm.
also Danielle Parrott,
Mhm.
both had applied last year. And then 2 years ago, in Adelia Spanner.
Yeah, Amy Sanner.
Mhm. And so going back a little bit further, I'm not sure, but at least for the last 2 years, those are the individuals who had previously applied.
Are we at 2
Can
or
I
3?
Can I add one more comment, piggybacking on what Allison mentioned? I I found myself wondering, I like the idea of diversity across a number of different variables, right? Geographic setting and gender and culture and ethnicity, and frankly, even training. Um,
Mhm.
Not only for the current makeup, but thinking about longevity of our group.
Mhm.
Such that if everyone who does the same thing is on the committee at the same time, what happens when we all rotate off in a mass exodus?
Mhm.
To the extent that we can maintain that sort of diversity proportion, that might be something worth considering.
Yeah.
Are we adding 2 or 3, Linda?
2.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you are at your max right now. So with 2 people coming off the advisory committee, you could add as many as 2. So 2 would be the maximum number.
But we don't have to add 2. We can add 1 if we
You,
want.
officially, according to the rules, you have to have a minimum of 3 non-board members and a max of 10. So potentially you could add 0 and still be in compliance with the rules, but I would encourage you to add at least 1 since we had sent out materials to everyone.
Yes. And that's what we're doing here.
So we've got Holly Kramer, and then we've got Pickwa. Here's my experience with her. I'm adjunct faculty with the University of Central Missouri, and Pickwa was recruited to the University of Central Missouri specifically in the behavior analysis program. She has experience, doing behavior analysis up in, I think it was in Nebraska is where she was before. She's got more of a more experience in special ed. And I think that's one of the things we need to think about too, is we need these people. And I don't know, I was going to say that, and then I think I might be ready to lie. Do these people have to be LBAs in Kansas to be on this committee?
According to the official policy, no. So it doesn't
Okay.
that anyone actually has to be licensed. And I know there was at least one individual in the past who was not licensed, at least for part of the time that he was on the advisory committee. And
Wasmer, but right, yeah.
that's correct.
But I mean, but he was our community member too,
Right.
which I think is okay. But
Yeah.
Allison,
That was my only concern with that one as well, is that they appear to live in Missouri and serve in Missouri.
no, Pickwa lives in Olathe, I think.
And this is a real quick, in terms of the official policy, it has come up before if it's a requirement that you have to live in Kansas to be on the advisory committee. And that is not a requirement. It's been discussed by the board. The board has basically said that that's not a requirement in the policy, but it is something that members can weigh as you're discussing applicants for the advisory committee. So it can be a factor for you to weigh and consider, but it's not absolutely a bar. And we've had some people that have moved out of state and they've asked that question too, if they need to come off the advisory committee. And according to the policy, they don't have to, but some of those individuals have done that after a certain time if they moved out of state or out of the country. We've had some people move to Japan and try to attend meetings at 2 a.m. with the time change. And so practical purposes, sometimes it makes sense to come off, but it's not a requirement.
So there's Pickwa, emphasis in special ed. She's definitely fluent in VCS, the verified course sequence, and the education that's needed for for the academic side, sort of like you, Pam, knowing what, so when you think like if you rotate off, if we had her, we would still have representation from that academic side. So I thought of that person. Yeah, Martell, somebody is from Paola. And then
Are any of
Pam,
them
do you know
CAD?
Mellinson?
Mellinson is a new faculty at KU, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Melanson, just FYI. I learned that.
Melanson.
I'm trying
Okay.
to practice it correctly.
Yeah, Melanson.
But yes, he's new faculty in the ABS department, and he is partnering with me in terms of research and clinical direction of the Child Development Center.
Oh, perfect. And so one of the things that came up on the psych one when we were doing this, the psych advisory committee, was also diversity across age groups. So looking at people that have experience with older folks as well as littles. Then we have Danielle Perrott. Is that how you say her last name?
Linda, she works for you. That's
I
Parrot.
know, but I've never heard her name said out loud.
Parrot.
Is it Parrot? Okay.
Parrot.
She's in Wichita, right? So we're in the southern part of the state. And now this person, Kylie Ryan, it came out as K Ryan on the resume. Is he a student?
She's a
She?
yeah. She's a
Okay.
consultant. She lives up north, I think.
Oh, okay.
Was a master's student in the online program at KU.
Okay.
I think her maiden name is Bama, which might be.
Yeah, she's married now, and doesn't she have her doctorate now?
I don't think so. Maybe.
Yeah, she does. I'm actually very certain that she does.
Yeah, I think now that you say that, I think she said she's in a postdoc program in her cover letter. If I'm
Yeah,
remembering
she
correctly.
graduated from Pitt. I have her on Facebook. Let me find her.
Her resume says Pittsburgh State for her bachelor's and KU for her master's. It does not say PhD.
Right. Yeah, and it didn't say BCBA, so I was like, did she get her BCBA? So I was so I'm glad you guys know who that person is. And
She's at
where does
PCMA now. Yeah.
she live? North
Her
Kansas
resume
City,
says
Missouri.
North Kansas
She's
City.
on the Missouri side.
Yeah.
And then there's Amy Sanner. So, the last one though that I'm a little bit interested in, even though it's not an exact match, but the Amanda Zangrillo.
Mm-hmm. She was one that popped out at me too.
She's a PsyD as well as a BCBAD.
Why?
So,
and she's not part of the
right, the group. Yeah,
so perspectives.
that's what I thought
Kind
too.
of, maybe part of the group. I don't know.
You are, Kelly, obviously.
Yeah, you're part of the group.
No,
No,
no.
I think Amanda is
Amanda is kind of part of the group. Yeah.
Oh,
one might put her, if we were going to force people into categories, I would put her in Alex Bernstein's category, Isaac's in my category.
okay.
In terms, that's what I was meaning about maybe
Okay,
successors rotating longevity wise.
correct. So maybe looking for clinical practice and academic standing as two defining characteristics that would help us select for these two. So it could be something like either Amanda, or I was interested in Amanda because there's not too many people out there like me that's both a licensed psychologist and a BCBAD. So so then maybe her, what were the three that you said, Pam? Amanda, who else?
Oh, I was
I-
commenting on people that had similar training. So Amanda Zangrillo, I think it was at previously she was at the University of Nebraska.
Mhm.
Sorry, that's right. Yeah, University of Nebraska and the Monroe Meyer Institute, and now she's at she's coming to Children's or is at Children's Mercy. Alec, is that correct? And she'll have an academic and clinical arrangement like you do. Is that all true? I don't want to say anything that's not true.
Not true.
You got it.
And then Isaac Melanson, as it happens, also is coming from or came from the University of Nebraska Medical Center and the Monroe Meyer Institute. And as I mentioned, he's at KU in the ABS department. Those were the two that I mentioned. I will say it caught my eye about I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, but Piqwa's association with the special education department in terms of
Yeah.
communicating
Pam,
with other disciplines.
Pam, I'm gonna go ahead and add to that. Being from the school perspective, that is a unique experience, and we do in the state of Kansas have a large population of BCBAs in our schools that are represented and that don't necessarily have that academic side. And it is very different in a school. I think we saw that from the survey of how many of us don't actually serve clients, but we are working under multiple guidelines with IDEA and our BCBA regulations. So that person intrigued me just because again, is somebody else on the school side.
Sounds like we're all in consensus about Piqua or
About Piqua.
there's a lot of consensus, maybe not everybody, but
Yeah. I think Piqua is very dedicated and sharp and is really part of that VCS course sequence. So are we thinking Piqua as one?
And Linda, I think you said she lives in Kansas?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
pretty sure she does because I could actually send her an email and ask. But I'm pretty sure she lives like in Olathe, maybe Overland Park.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just couldn't tell
she's
from her.
got a 913 area code on her phone number.
But she practices completely in Missouri.
She teaches at the University of Central Missouri. So I'm not sure.
I didn't bring that up to say that I'm against it at all,
Right.
just clarifying.
She has to be well, she doesn't have to be practicing, I guess, but she's licensed over here.
Yeah. I went back and forth between Piqua and Amanda Martell because I liked the school service as well. And the only reason I leaned more toward Amanda was because it looked like they're practicing directly in Kansas. But I don't know that Kansas and Missouri are so different that like a perspective of somebody who's practicing in Missouri wouldn't be relevant to this board.
Yeah. And I believe that she does do consultation and whatnot in Kansas.
Yeah. And I imagine if she's teaching students, students will practice in Kansas. So she's got to be aware of Kansas.
Right.
Yeah, as well.
And so I went back and forth, like in terms of that class of people between Piqua and Amanda. And that's only, from my egocentric position because she does have that dual licensure, which I find.
Oh, Amanda Zangrillo, you mean?
Yeah, Amanda Zangrillo. So those are the two for me that I would think with regards to that side of the fence, and then we have Holly, who's applied a couple of times as probably a pretty much a practitioner, right? For those of us who know Holly. I'm surprised by all the
last
Do we
time I
have a
saw.
practitioner that stands out? Holly, Danielle, or Amy, I think are the
I haven't
choice
had as much interaction
practitioners.
with Amy as I have the other two, but that's because the other two have served on Kanzaba at some point.
Mhm. Yeah, Amy has been around for a while, and um for a while got out of service and worked with the insurance companies as one of the
That's right.
yeah, as a peer review person, and then I believe left that and is now back in the clinical side of things, and focuses more on kids that are under age 7. So I think Holly and Danielle have experience with a range of kids. Amy's much more early childhood.
I will say too, I don't think Holly included this in her materials, but she is doing some work on advocating for getting ABA into school districts right now. And it just continues to get ABA out into rural areas, which might align with some of our goals as well.
Yeah.
Amanda Martell is also clinical, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I don't know why I put
Yeah, where's
Amanda and
Spring Hill?
Pitwa together. So then,
Yeah.
But
Okay,
that's-
Gardner. So Spring Hill, where Spring Hill? Yeah. Thank you. Who was that, Christy?
Yeah.
Are you sure, Christy? Are you sure you want to go away?
No, they're not. They're not.
Um,
I have met Amy Sanner. I actually didn't put it together until you started calling her Amy because that's the only name I know her by.
yeah.
And she's at Autism from the start. She's been there for a long time, and I have a lot of respect for their team there.
Mhm.
I have some familiarity with their leadership team and what they're doing over there. I think they're doing really great early intervention work, and they also have 2 pretty large clinics. And so she could offer some, maybe not now, maybe later down the line, but I think she could offer some really great insight into that comprehensive early intervention side of practice and the kind of larger clinical practices in Kansas. So I think either now or later, I think she'd be a great addition to the team from that perspective.
Yeah, coming back over to Amanda Martell. One of the things that I like about that she presents in her CV is the design and implementation of specialized programs for conditions other than autism as well. And she does FBAs. So
I
think they're all strong.
Yeah. Mhm. My choices are Pickle and Amanda Martell. That does not mean that has to be other people's choices. Those are my two.
No, I mean, I'm going, gosh, between Amanda and Holly, and yeah.
I do have to skedaddle right at 3 because my family's going camping. I'm sure you see them. Their shadows like doing this thing. So we have 4 minutes.
Got 4 minutes. So,
And Linda, you could handle this in different ways. One thing you could do is you could say, a vote on a particular person and see how many members of the advisory committee would like to vote for that person. Or you could go person by person with the advisory committee and ask them, what are the 2 people that you would vote for? I can count those up. But there's also informal consensus as well. So I'll leave it to you.
we are in favor of Pickwa. Okay, so I think we have consensus on Pickwa. And now it's the other spot that is looking between Amanda. Amanda's really interesting to me. but Amanda, Amy, Danielle, and Holly. I want to tell Holly if she doesn't get on this time to keep submitting her materials. And the same with Danielle, right? I mean, I think,
I was going to say it might be worth mentioning that they can view this conversation. I know that's what the first thing I did when I knew that it was an option when I was first brought on the board. And they can listen to Linda. You said very nice things about me. Thank you. I've never thanked you. But you know that they can go back and listen to this conversation and understand why we picked one person over another, and that when it's Alex time to step down, then that'd be a great time for Isaac to step in if he's still interested,
Right.
kind of thing. So just understanding that it's not they weren't qualified or we didn't really like what they had to offer, just what adds that continues to add that diverse perspective to the board as the folks as who steps off matters.
And with that also said, as someone who's new to this process, is this common to discuss these while recorded, or do we typically send out a doodle poll or something to vote after the fact?
No, the advisory committee policy says you can either do consensus or you can vote, but if you do take a vote, it has to be in an open process, an open meeting. It says specifically you're not allowed to do a closed ballot kind of thing. So
Yeah, appreciate it.
I would say one
I
of the
lost
things
connection there. I'm sorry.
one of the things about Holly is that she is from Russell, Kansas.
Yeah.
It gives us geographic diversity. Sorry, Mike.
It's no worries. I was saying I lost connection earlier when we were discussing Amy Sanner, and I just want to say that I used to work with her back in the past, about 2011. Started working with her, and she's a really good clinician. I think we kind of touched points that she did most of her work with the preschool age kid, which is currently where she works now. But just wanted to kind of reinforce that she is actually a really good candidate, and I know it's been a couple of times that she's applied to the process. So, I just wanted to throw my hat in the ring and say that I think she'd be a strong candidate to join.
what I'm hearing, David, is that we've got consensus with Piqua. So I think we can offer her. Is there a way that we can pause on that and offer someone and discuss it further, because it's now 3:00?
I mean, if you wanted to recommend one person today, you could do that.
Okay.
That is an option, because you are at your minimum. So you could recommend one person today or two people today, but it doesn't say that you have to do it at this meeting. So if you wanted to have further discussion or take a vote and someone else, the next meeting, you could do that as well.
Are you guys good with that? And then that can be the first item under old business so that we can make sure we do that. That way we all feel like we are able to thoroughly give, because they're all really strong. I'm looking at all these people and I'm like, man, can we have, how large can our advisory committee be? But yeah, so I think recommend Piqua and then continue the discussion at our next meeting. And I saw several heads nod, so I think everybody's in agreement on that. Are you good with that, David?
That sounds great.
All right. Having said that, what I want to do is hold on. Allison, don't leave yet. We need to give Mike and Christy a round of applause, right? For time spent with us. And gosh, Christy, all that effort that you put into when we were reviewing the statutes and the language, and then also the survey. And Mike, your perspective, it was nice spending time with you at APBA. I'm sorry to see the both of you go, actually. So please stay in touch. And
Yes. Same
yes.
goes for you, Linda, and everyone. It's been such a pleasure. Politics is not my jam, but David, you made it palatable, and it's been such a pleasure to get to know everyone and to network and just be part of this conversation. So thank you for allowing me to join and be part of this.
Thank you, Christy. Mike?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to my fellow committee members and appreciate you all for one, the experience and two, just the great conversation and ability to push the field in Kansas forward. I just want to leave with saying, you guys are all awesome. Please keep up the good work. And I do plan to be back. I just got to
Okay.
leave for a little bit to get some work stuff done, but I do understand I have 3 terms that I can burn up at some point. So I
Yeah.
do plan on using some more of those terms. So this
Okay,
isn't the
that's
last you've heard from me.
all right. That's good to hear, Mike. That's good to hear. So,
Yeah,
all
I'll,
right.
I'll just echo Linda's comments. Christy and Mike, you guys have been excellent members, and I've really appreciated all of your thoughtful conversation and discussion. And Linda, you're absolutely right in terms of Christy, all of your work on the unprofessional conduct regulations and digging into all of those materials. You went above and beyond, and so we will miss you both. Hope you stay in contact, and I really do thank all the members of the advisory committee. This time is incredibly valuable. I know how busy you are, but it helps us function the way that we do by having, instead of 12 board members, we have 50 to 60 individuals who are providing really thoughtful conversations and helping us do this work. So thank you to you two specifically. We'll miss you on the advisory committee, but great work.
Yeah. And it looks like we have an honorary member present.
Yeah, because it's her birthday and she's why we're going camping. And I told her at 3:00 I would be ready to go.
Oh,
3:03.
happy birthday. Have fun camping. Do you want to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Do it. Say motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So we have a motion to adjourn on the docket. Do I have a second?
It's gotta be Christy or Mike.
I
motion.
second that.
All right.
We
have
both
a joint
second.
Yes, we
Yeah.
both.
All
We
in
both second.
favor? Aye.
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 Any opposition? Motion carries. You guys go have fun at your camping.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Thank
Aye.
you.
Thanks,
Everybody. Bye.
Thank you. How'd you think it went?
That was great. We'll see you later.
All right. Bye, David.